Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are part of the Black Sexuality Studies Collective at UC Santa Barbara. We've come together today to think about the question, how can we create space to foster a lineage of research that centers Black intimate futures or futurity within the academy? I'm Terrell. I'm in the Department of Sociology as an assistant professor, and I will allow my colleagues to introduce themselves and say a little bit more about where they are at the university. So, Zakiya.
Hi, I'm Zakiya Luna. I am in the Department of Sociology and Feminist Studies. How about you, Mireille?
Hi, everybody. My name is Mireille Miller-Young, and I'm in the Department of Feminist Studies at UC Santa Barbara. Yeah.
Yes.
We're all colleagues.
Yeah.
Thank you for being with us.
Yeah.
We're like, yeah, where are we? Everybody. So that was a great question. Who wants to get us started? Terrell?
I can. I think in thinking of this question, about creating space and fostering a lineage of research that is centering Black intimate futures, I think things like this, like the Black Sexuality Studies Collective, is what came immediately to mind, right? Trying to find ways to institutionalize a lineage in a way for us to create the types of resources that both scholars who are starting their careers need, and really undergraduates and graduate students as well, who are setting off and trying to think about what is the cutting edge type of work. So a lot of it, what came to mind was, how is this collective an example for the types of coalitions and formalizing those relationships within the study of Black sexuality within the academy? A lot of other thoughts came to mind, in some ways thinking about the struggles with centering Black sexualities, often, which is that we're often compared to, or thinking through the lens of what, thinking through like the white gaze, right? So one of my favorite, and by favorite, I mean not favorite questions, is, can white people do this? Or is this what white people are doing, right? Or other groups of folks. And so thinking about the study of Black bodies and sexualities being untethered, right, to the desires and that inherent comparison between others, and what that means. So intragroup kind of differences. And I think what this collective is a great model of, in many ways, is that in our disciplines, we're often very siloed in the studies that we do around Black sexualities, right? That folks will give the impression that if something isn't done in that discipline, then it has not been done before. And so, thinking of ways that this collective is an opportunity to push the collective conversation forward and increase kind of a proclivity towards interdisciplinary discourse, right, across departments, and really helping young scholars and future scholars to come forward and really understand what the direction is, not just in the particular discipline, but of the general field at large, right? So drawing on works from not just, as a sociologist, thinking through what's happening in performance studies, what's happening in feminist studies. I mean, some of the biggest books that I use are in performance studies, and they use similar methods, but they're the folks who are doing this work a decade before some sociologists had gotten around to doing some of the answering or thinking about some of these questions. So how do we push that conversation forward and resist the boundary making around our disciplines? So I think this is a great example of how the beginnings of that can look, I think, institutionalized at a university.
Thank you for that, Terrell. And when I think about other parts of the question, I think about even like, what does space mean, right? And we are, doing this a year and then some into a pandemic. We are using technology, and we're all in different physical spaces right now. And the sort of importance of virtual space for helping people create communities, right? And I think that's particularly important in thinking about intergenerational sort of exchanges in lineage, because of people's different placement, even just sort of when we think about socioeconomically, right? The model of like people gathering together, while useful, like physically, does require people to have different levels of resources. And when we're talking about the type of work that many of us are doing, that work can be marginal in many ways, right? Not nearly as well funded in the academy or out of the academy as other research. So even the idea of being able to physically meet together that can be taken for granted in other areas actually isn't necessarily, right, something that can be taken for granted. So like thinking about the great thing about being able to do this via a Zoom, right? And to leave a permanent record to the degree that video is permanent, for some future generations who are going to be able to see this, who we can't even imagine, right? Who are going to be able to literally type into Google at some point and say like, you know, Black sexualities, Black intimacies, right? Or something, and have a whole bunch of us pop up, right? Beautiful Black faces like us, if I say so myself. And what that even means, right? To be able to create a space with folks that you can't even imagine in the future, but you know will be there, right? And will so benefit from the work, and it allows for a centering of the work in a different way, and a discovery of the work in a different way. That's some of the thoughts I had, building upon what you were saying. Yeah.
I apologize for turning off my camera. I was having a coughing.
Yeah, no, it's okay. We're still recording, and you could. Did you want to give some reflection on it? Or?
Yes. Sorry to mess up our beautiful, seamless video.
It's the reality of doing
take
this
two, because those answers were so great. Please forgive me, everyone. This is live TV.
This is the realities of what it means to be doing this work. Like,
absolutely. And usually my kids are coming in the room and distracting, and that would be the reason. But right now, the reason is working with bronchitis and having an asthma attack. So I was just with my inhaler. That's the way it is. I feel like for me, this question really is deeply personal, in that what drove me to the academy in the first place were relationships with other Black scholars, and particularly my mentor, Robin D.G. Kelly, and the people that I created relationships with at NYU and later at UCSB and other institutions. And it was those relationships that gave me, live TV. Those relationships that gave me a sense of what it means to be a scholar in the academy. Like those were my role models, but also a sense of like a mirror to see myself, where in other ways I would have been not reflected, or invisible, or so kind of isolated or tokenized that I wouldn't have had a community to help me make meaning of my experience or my work. And we were so few of us at the time, I feel like, who were trying to really push the boundaries of thinking about Black sexual economies and scholarship around sexuality and gender, that we look to, the core OGs, people like E. Patrick Johnson and Dwight McBride and Kathy Cohen, and they were so generous with us. And when and it's so amazing to meet people that you read and you look up to, and then they're just so real with you and genuine and supportive and ask you how you're doing. And so, we sought to model that for each other, and to create with Black sexual economies, and to, and with all of our mentorship in our own institutions outside of that, framework, to kind of to model that that kind of real support. And so I think about the kind of Black intimate futures being part of the labor of being a Black academic, just dealing with each other and not just what we study, but our praxis. And so I feel like what I enjoy doing is, and what gives me a sense of accomplishment, excuse me, is not just the ways that the academy evaluates you around publications and this kind of way in which we are thought about as being productive, but the kinds of relationships and the success of the people that we mentor in this field. And that's what I feel like is the real legacy that we can build, is nurturing a field that we're invested in and that has something important to say at this moment. And really, I feel like the university is starting to get a sense of that, where they're being called to task around diversity and equity and Black Lives Matter and anti-racism. And then they're like, oh, at least when we're reminding them, this is the work we've been doing. Do you recognize its importance now?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We've been telling you how central we are. Now do you get it? You know, kind of thing. And I just think that it's the legacy that we hope to create around Black futurity in the academy is to model these relationships of almost like kinship and family and support,
Mm-hmm.
to actively and decisively not reproduce the kind of corporate model of competition, of the kind of an isolation and alienation that exists. I had the fortune of having a fellowship last year at places like Harvard, and it was at the Hutchins Center. And it's so interesting because Harvard is, like, in many ways for people a dream school. We'll talk about the most resources and everything. But what misery on a campus where everyone is basically contingent precarious worker, except for the most distinguished scholars, who then also are still forced to feel precarious, even when they're world famous, they're denied tenure, right? They have all these millions of dollars, but no community either, right? People coming through being able to bring 20 fellows a year, but no way to keep that legacy alive and bring people and recruit people to campus, right? So it was very interesting to get that perspective of this purported very esteemed place. And I said, I can't wait to get back to my colleagues at UCSB, where we have community and where we are creating something collectively, and where we have a sense that we're not going to allow anyone to be denied tenure who are a part of our group. Like, they better watch out if that were to happen. But also we would support each other up to that point, and no one would be alone and in that position to then be surprised by the institution's betrayal. So, but I feel very fortunate to be part of this community and to be in community with you all, and to be fostering this new, like, evolving direction of research around intimacy, sexuality, and gender of Black scholarship and Black bodies.
I think that was, hearing both of you talk about this, one of the things that came to mind, and I think from what Zakiya shared about, how funding works in our world. And I think us being lucky enough to have funding to start a collective and to really formalize the relationships that, of course, that Mireille was talking about, like to support those relationships, to make them a constant thing is super important. And in my work, I'm always striving for ways to, to think through Black sexuality beyond the medicalization of the body, right, and beyond, like the focus on disease and pain. And I think this is thinking about future and futurity in our way is really that your work, all of our work in some way, is really trying to call into space what is desire, what is passion, what is, liberatory about Black intimacy or Black sexuality, and not prohibitive or dangerous or perilous in some type of way. And so my hope is, in this, as we continue forward, is to really be able to model that for folks to come, right? And in our relationships, to think about, to think through a future means to think through the possibilities of that, I think in a positive way. And I think that's the direction that I would want us all to go in. And I think we struggle sometimes because the Black experience and Black bodies, the funding and the ways that those things work often tend to be funneled directly towards those more problematic or issues within communities, rather than thinking about how do we fund prosperity within community.
Absolutely. I remember having, senior administrators tell me, because of this push in the institution towards grant making, you know, well, why don't you just write about, HIV and, find ways to get grants? And I'm like, the models of around sex work studies would be around, trafficking and commercially sexually exploited youth and these kind of models that I'm not invested in. I'm invested in something that's a very different project that is not legible for a lot of grant makers, and it's super frustrating to have that experience. To still so many of the formal grant institutions do not really see our work or see the importance of our work because of the models around sexual peril and danger, and the particular ways in which granting is organized around, seeking to solve a problem, right? And so I feel like that's one of the areas where I would like to continue to affect change at the levels we can, is to kind of shift those paradigms so that we could create more sustainable models and lucrative models, because those big grants, those multi-$100,000 grants, are the kinds of things that you really need to institutionalize, but so often they're awarded to those other kind of projects that are about really more focused on the question of Black death and illness and violence, right, against Black bodies, in a way that, not that we don't approach the question of violence, but we do so out of a very different framework. So those are ongoing questions I feel like we are going to have to contend with when we are thinking about the shaping the legacy, so that we can improve the possibility of future funding for not only our collectives but the individual scholarship of us and our students.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and of course, this question always comes up, right? When you have a question about, work in the academy, which is the, like, to what end, right? And what are the limits of it? And I think that that's something that with some areas of work and activist commitments, people don't have to ask those questions because the academy is designed around that work. And as you're both talking about, Black sexualities as a problem is a very, there's a very easy way to actually follow that funding path. And I think probably the realities of the past year has been it's even easier, right? But if you want to talk about, like, resilience, joy, pleasure, like, that is not beyond some memes. That is a very difficult thing for people to imagine. And I think part of what has appealed to me about reproductive justice as a movement and being in the spaces of reproductive justice is that, like, it's not only about talking about reproductive oppression and the ways that sexualities, Black sexuality and other sexuality is actually exploited, but also, like, the joy of sex and pleasure and the joy of raising family, the joy of these things, right? And creating other families and kinship networks and the community work, right? But often implicit in that is a critique of capitalism. And that's where I think a big part of the sort of disjuncture between academic imperatives and what we sort of collectively envision for futures and why that question continues to come up. And I think there's still a lot that we can do, even with that tension. But I think that is part of it, right? Where is the funding in talking about joy and pleasure? And I mean, I'll say it's an area where I think of like, well, there's a reason why positive psychology actually, they figured out a way to frame things. Hey, talking about intergenerational, hi.
And on cue.
And on cue,
Child care.
Yeah, no, but this is also like,
say hello.
Hi. Hey, it's been a while. Oh my gosh, you don't know.
How old are you, Makani?
You don't remember the last time I saw you. I do. We were in a parking garage.
How old are you now?
6.
6? Nice.
And my brother's 4. And when he was born, I was 2 years old.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I remember. Yeah. Wow. Right. But this is also like the reality of like our lives. Whereas I think, even before the pandemic, right? People's families, like weren't separate from people's families, and people's interests in the work wasn't like just like, oh, there's a question that interests me. Like, well, there's also things I'm interested in, but because of my family members, and like it actually like things going on in our lives and the realities of that, right? And I think that that's actually part of the difference in sort of when you're talking about the different relationships, right? Like it's not just relationship among us, but also like who else we bring into the room with us, and that's not an unusual conversation, right? Or source of inspiration.
I mean, I feel like that's been the reality of the pandemic year and working from home, but it was also like, even before the pandemic, as you said, like I was in faculty meetings when I started to go into labor, and
Wow.
you know, I was literally working up till I went into labor because of the way that the leave system works.
Right.
Many academics time their kids so that they can get max time off, like factor that into, okay, it's going to be right before the summer, so then I could get this. And it's many times like childcare fell through and I had to miss class or bring my kid to class and be like, you guys are watching a movie, I gotta go. Like it's kind of really intense. And at the same time, we were chatting before the recording about the ways in which we're evaluated, and so many of us who are associate faculty literally get stuck at this level because we have kids at this time, and it is never a good time to have them, but there is this marked difference between especially mothering parents and parents of color who lack resources of to be super impacted career-wise by having children, while dads and others don't even see that they actually benefit at this time. So the intimate aspects of these questions really do hit home, and it also affects like how you can even do your work as an ethnographer in the sex industry. It's been super hard for me to be able to do that work just because of having kids and being a mom and having that. And for me, with the second book, I've been trying to figure out, how do I write this book without without being able to go into archives and go into the field and this kind of thing. And when you're brain dead and when you're tired and when you've been up all night with kids, or when, I think that so much of the academy is really inhuman I'm feeling personally very burnt out because of being pulled in so many directions, and also feeling invalidated by what I do, like because that what I'm not doing is what's valued. And so I guess I'm trying to find ways to not only practice resilience, but recuperation of, like I said, what I came in to do this for, which was a totally different project than just my own personal success and going up the ladder and making the most money. But yet you still have the reality of being in institutions, especially at the UC, where California is one of the most expensive places to live in the country. And Santa Barbara is probably the most expensive place among all the other UCs to live, where these things really impact us. And the least Black people, I probably, well, next to Merced, maybe, in Santa Cruz, um, with the Vincency, but in terms of in the community. But we're fighting to do recruitments, we're fighting to do cluster hires so we can have more. For a long time, I was only one of 10 to 12 Black women on campus. Now we only have about 8 or 9 tenured Black women. There was a study that came out recently from Chronicle that showed the freaking ridiculous low percentage, less than 2% of Black women tenure faculty at UCSB. You know, all of those things matter and impact the work that we can do. So thinking about these structural issues impacts our work, impacts our projects, impacts the significance and the importance of creating those kinship support systems even among each other. And so like Zakiya said, she knows my kid. Like, you know, these are things that are not separate. These are things that are part of our work, and our live experience. So um, I'm hanging in because of this precise matter of, you know, Black intimacy in the academy. You guys are the reasons why I'm able to hang in there. Otherwise, you know, it would be impossible, I feel. Yeah.
I guess I'm mindful of thought, but I have two thoughts though, or mindful of time. I have two thoughts. I mean, one, I'm like, then the thing that comes up to me that like I think about is like, then what is the responsibility in thinking about future generations? Because there's times when for any of the work, I mean, even whether it's like, I mean, my work also connects with social movements and human rights. And at times I'm like, but also like, do you want to come in? I mean, do you really want to be in this space? And, you know, like there's, I think, well, just in the time since I've been in grad school, there's been, you know, the internet has expanded and there's much more sort of broader knowledge about the like challenges of the academy, to put it mildly. And there's a whole genre of like quit lit and things like that. I mean, I think there's just a lot more awareness of like, no, like we're talking about structural problems here. Like, no, really, like these patterns are structural problems, and it's not just, you know, those in the disciplines of like, say, sociology that study patterns that are acknowledged. Like finally others are like, okay, maybe there's some patterns in the issues here. So then what does it mean to, what is the responsibility to a future generation? Like, is it responsible to foster a lineage? Like, and so sometimes, you know, that's something I wrestle with. And I think, you know, the way I partially deal with that is like trying to be candid with students about what it means generally to be in the academy, what it means to do certain types of work, like what the reward systems are and are not. And I think, and well, let's talk about particularly in UC, where there is this every few years thing, the treadmill, as some people call it. But even outside of UC, right? Like there's the sort of metricization of the work. And so the like wanting to foster lineages and also wanting to be like, and if you're coming in this space, want you to be so careful and like so much putting your health first and recognizing that like the institution, you know, institutions love our labor to a point, but also our labor is expendable. Like, you know, and we know this because anytime a faculty member leaves, like, people say bye, and like, and then there's another, in the treadmill, and that's part of the sort of harsh reality. Academia isn't separate from the capitalist model. It has certainly more flexibility than other aspects of the capitalist model, other jobs, but it's still part of it. And so what that sort of responsibility is as older generations, to folks like, whether it's the graduate students in the collective or the undergrads who, or I don't know, there's going to be young folks who saw the BET Awards and are like following what's going on Twitter. And then there's all these like amazing, like, sure, there's people just giving their general like sort of thoughts about Lil Nas X, but then there's like, academics who are putting these like really insightful analyses even through Twitter, and people are like, oh, wow, they see academics doing that and they think that that's what the Academy like totally allows for. And you're like, well, hold on. So hold on. So yeah, just wrestling with all of that. Like, I had to pull in the BET Awards somehow.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I know we make the Academy like super cool, and people think, you could be like me and be on Netflix with
doing swear
Nick
words.
Cage. Nick and I are like first name, He calls me all the time now, and it's like, what's up?
Well, it is actually,
tell me more.
It is surreal, like, to turn on something and see you. I'm like, there's my colleague talking, like studying sexualities and talking about like what it means, like the etymology of the word bitch. I'm just like, whoa,
so I'm making the Academy look cool, right?
Yes, yeah.
But then why did UCSB press office refuse to actually put it in the current?
That's right.
They were like, no thanks.
We're
not going to say that we had a faculty member on Netflix doing that show.
Even that, it was trending. That show was trending.
Who else is on Netflix from our university? But they were like, no, because it's too risque and too so yeah, just delete it. Just delete what I did and the contribution, and so. But that's part of doing the work. I experienced that working on porn for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And sex work, when they think that they can use you,
mm-hmm.
They will have you talk to donors and things. And when they think that you should be hidden away and taken away from the donors and that thing, they will.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of like with the work that we're approaching. So if I was again talking about the problem of pornography and these kind of issues, I'd probably be invited to all give talks to the donors and things. It'd probably be in the room. So I think that they still see that as dangerous. But I've learned in this game in the last 20 years, to really try to remove my sense of value from their system. And I think it took a long time. And it still takes like courage and self-talk, right? Because it's really personal, and you also want to be seen in a good light and liked and rewarded and promoted. But in the end, the Academy is never going to be a space that serves all the needs that we have as Black sexuality scholars. We always are going to have to go beyond it. And we shouldn't let it suck up all of our energy so we don't have the energy to go beyond it and do other work. And I have felt stifled in my creativity, frankly, in this regime. And I'm finally getting a sense of ways in which I want to exceed it. So that's part of also, I'd like to model that for the community to come to say, yeah, you may get your PhD, you want to be lucky enough to get a tenure track position and be one of the 3% of the Black folks in the Academy. It seems like with all this critical race theory talk, it sounds like we're running the Academy. We were like 3%.
Yeah.
How?
Wish you had that much power.
we don't.
Yeah.
And to
You
be
know,
fair, it is probably less than 3% because not all of the folks who are counted in that number do anything related to critical race theorists or the other
right,
things.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
Right,
actually
right.
even less folks than we would
Yeah.
think.
Right. You're counting all the
Right.
mathematicians and, you know, even political scientists or art people, like who are doing nothing related to, you know, actually race study or Black studies, right?
Mhm.
But they make it seem like it's this thing that's taking over, you know. And I'm just chuckling because, you know, they even figured out, like, you know, Black queer theory and intersectionality yet. Like they're like got a few words and they're like, this is dangerous. Like, wait till they find out about you guys. What we really be doing.
Oh.
But you know, no, they really think it's dangerous and that we're brainwashing the kids. But you know what? In teaching, they're
They're
hungry
teaching
for
us.
it.
And they're
Hungry.
teaching us. I mean, that's.
And they're teaching, yes. And it's like, it's often like the white students and the, you know, like the, you know, who are like, this is my favorite class ever, you know, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, really, I'm surprised. So, you know, I think that we have a lot of, you know, possibility to shape some minds and some narrative, but we are also super marginal, and we also need to exceed the institution to really do things that are going to be fulfilling personally and in terms of our activist work and um, you know, and our artistic work and
Mhm.
other work that we creativity and things that we want to do. So I just recommend that um, you know, for the upcoming scholars that they remember that, like, don't put all of your sense of value into this business and and keep those colleagues, those friendships close because they're life-saving and life-giving. And the joy that Zakiya was talking about, that's where it comes from too. So yeah, I think we did a great conversation here. This is good.
I think that's a
So
great place to end, honestly.
yeah,
I'm just like
can
all
we
warm
sign
and
up?
fuzzy.
There you go. Okay. BSSC, look out. We're coming with, you know, we're having more and more. This is part of a series of discussions that we're doing around topics around Black intimacies, also thinking about questions around intimacies in the context of COVID and the twin pandemics of COVID and anti-Black racism. We're going to be continuing this conversation over the next month and year in collaboration with the New Sexualities Research Focus Group, which will be funding a series of work that we're going to be doing in the next academic year. We're coming out with a website, and look out for our podcast and TV show on the horizon too, probably. And don't forget the merch. The merch will be coming up too.
Already.
Yeah, so because we got to fund the project, so
Got it all. Yeah.
getting on that merch. But thank you, and we appreciate our support from the Feminist Futures Center at UCSB. Thank you to my dear colleagues, Dr. Zakiya Luna, sociologist extraordinaire, UC Santa Barbara, Dr. Terrell Winder, another sociologist extraordinaire. Me, I'm a historian, interdisciplinary historian, but get up in other fields too. I'm promiscuous.
Get up all in there.
We love it. But thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.